and CEO of the Downtown Denver Partnership and co-founder of Denver Startup Week. Denver Startup Week is the largest free entrepreneurial event in the world, and it's only possible thanks to the support of our sponsors. We have nearly 40 sponsor companies who contribute to Denver Startup Week and make it possible. Let's show our love for these companies today and all week long. Thanks to our title sponsors, the Downtown Denver Partnership, JP Morgan Chase, Prologis, and Zero, and our track sponsors who help make the great content you're hearing today possible. Battery 621 and the Public Works, Capital One Cafe, Colorado Lending Source, Friday Help, Quizlet, Exactly, Zayo, and Zestful. Our headline event sponsors are bringing you inspiration from around the country. Thank you to Wix, Kenzen, MAPR Agency, Obsidian HR, Kickstart Fund, Promontory Mortgage, Molson Coors, and Comcast. And finally, thank you to our partner and member sponsors. They're all listed on the screen. Thank you for your support of Denver Startup Week. Now, let's get to it.
It's time for a whole new way to think about sales planning, execution, and optimization. To let go of old habits and embrace a data-driven mindset. Our revolutionary approach to sales performance management will get your sales unstuck and fundamentally transform your business to create lasting success. It's time to unleash your true sales power.
Welcome to Denver Startup Week. Happy day 4. We're so excited that you're here. I'm Ashley Cloud, People Track Chair and member of the Denver Startup Week Organizing Committee. Thank you for attending our first virtual Denver Startup Week. One of my very favorite things about startups is that we're always trying new things and learning every step along the way. And that's exactly what we're doing this year with our first virtual Denver Startup Week. So thanks so much for joining us, for trying something new together, and for your graciousness, patience, and kindness as we work through some technical kinks this week. Today alone, we have 52 sessions. So at Denver Startup Week, we strive to make sure all of our sessions are a place where attendees can connect, learn, and grow, regardless of age, gender identity, gender expression, race, ability, sexual orientation, or the combination of any of those. We try to make sure there's something for everyone and that everyone sees themselves in Denver Startup Week. We appreciate our sponsors, especially our People Track sponsor, Exactly, our volunteers, our panelists, our session organizers, and our community to help make this week happen. This is our 8th year of doing Denver Startup Week, and we couldn't do it without you. Don't forget to use the hashtag Den Startup Week on social to keep connecting. A few sessions to highlight coming up after this one at 11 a.m. We have authenticity and vulnerability, how the struggles you face can shape you as a leader. At 12 p.m. Mountain Standard Time, we have Beyond Trans 101, Small Talk, Big Heart. And at 1 p.m. we have Having Tough Conversations. And thanks so much for joining this conversation today. Hiring and managing remotely. A lot of us are learning how to do this for the first time or learning how to do it at scale. This panel has a broad perspective from those who've been doing 100% remote from the inception of their company, or doing a hybrid, and a company who is learning along the way. So thanks again for being here. And with that said, I will pass it to my favorite moderator, Emma.
Thanks, Ashley. Good morning. And like Ashley said, welcome to day 4 of Denver Startup Week. We are glad to have you joining this panel on hiring remotely. I am Emma Bindbeutel. I'm the Director of People Operations at Choozle, a local startup company in the Rhino area of Denver. If you are joining today, we will assume you are currently hiring, about to hire, or preparing to hire for your company later down the road. Anyone working since COVID hit 6 months ago has had to adjust to a lot of new normal of remote life. And our goal today is to hopefully give you tips to help you hire remotely from our 3 panel experts. All 3 of these panel experts have had a lot of experience hiring remotely because that's how their companies were set up even before COVID. So we'll dive into a lot of their tips and tricks that they have picked up along the way. Hiring can always be a challenge, and we want to help prepare you for running a successful hiring remote process. So I am going to kick it off. Just a quick housekeeping rules. You will see that there is a chat button on this Zoom link. So if you do have any questions, we are going to make sure that I will be reviewing those and we'll get those in for the last 15-20 minutes of the panel. But for the first 40, we'll make sure that we are focused on a good discussion around this with the questions that we have prepared. So take note to chat and just let us know if anything pops up, and I'll be sure to get those in at the end. So I am going to kick things off, and we are going to introduce our three panelists that we have here today. And I'm going to start off with Darcy.
Hi guys, I'm so happy to be here. I'm Darcy Boles. I'm Director of Culture and Innovation at Taxjar. I live in San Diego, California, and also partially in our camper van because I'm remote. Taxjar is a fully remote SaaS company. We help take the headache out of e-commerce sales tax because sales tax is one of the most complicated things in the world. There's probably a better way to do it, so we invented it. Our team is around 160 people. We're distributed all across the US. We even have one of our engineers who lives on a boat. So pretty cool stuff there. I'm really focused on my team, the people experience team. So we've got a team of recruiters as well as we've got some HR as well as people experience designers to make sure the experience hierarchy structures, we can really take the money that we save from not having overhead and actually put that into our employees, ensure they're supported and set up for success. And that's just kind of one of the beauties of many of the things that we do on the people experience team at Taxjar. So my background is actually in hospitality. I was at Airbnb globally for 4 years before I transitioned to fully remote when I moved to the mountains, did some soul searching and realized that I could have a career remotely. So that's a little bit about me.
Thanks, Darcy. All right, and Drew.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me. I'm Drew Bradbury. I'm head of talent at DAT Solutions. I've been head of talent here for 3 months. I was hired remotely, and so we'll talk a little bit about that. And I think a good way to explain our organization is to talk a little bit about my experience and why I joined DAT, because they have a compelling story. We are a software as a service software company in the freight logistics space, and we've been a software company for 42 years. We provide a suite of software as a service solutions to millions of customers in the freight logistics space. And I know some people can hear that term freight logistics and not really even know what it means or kind of glaze over. But I think what's relatable to it for me and to everyone is that everyone on this call here, if they're looking at something in a screen or something in their house or even the clothes they're wearing on their bodies, arrive to them in one way or another by freight. And so this is an industry that kind of touches all of us. And it's an industry we've been in for almost half a century. By the numbers, we've got about $118 billion of transactions running through our system. We are based out of Portland, about 600 employees total, about 10 of them in Denver, but growing to 200, which is why we're proud to be part of Denver Startup Week and sponsoring. We also have an office in Bangalore, India, and a couple of small satellite offices also in North America. We've grown purposefully over 42 years. And because of that, I want to just touch very quickly on our culture. We look to hire people who are bright and driven, but it's also important that they're nice. And that's important to us because we've grown purposefully and deliberately. So we've had a chance to evaluate that and those soft skills along with the hard skills. What I've been saying is we're kind of the coolest tech company that maybe people haven't heard of. We are growing during the pandemic. We are in a fairly recession-proof industry. And so feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn if you have any other questions. And again, thank you for having me.
Great, thank you. And last but not least, we have Shelia joining us this morning.
Hi, my name is Shelia Repeta. I work at TeamSnap, and much like Darcy, I actually work for a company that has headquarters we're in Boulder with about 40 employees in the Denver metro area. I'm in Southern California. So we have a mostly remote culture. We do have a headquarters downtown off of Pearl Street in Boulder. However, when they hired my role about 2 years ago, I decided to make sure people was remote and virtual so that most of our employees, I would have the same experience as them. So we're about 80 people. We exist to take the work out of play. We call it Whoop. We're a software app that basically, it's a sports communication app, and we do registration, payments. If you have a kid in sports, you may be one of the 23 million people who use our product. And so we've been doing this inception of our company. We had 2 co-founders that started it, and one moved to Portland from Colorado. And very early on, we decided that it was right to be remote and that was going to work for us. So our learning experience has been a little different in COVID, but I'm excited to share just some of the things we've learned along our remote journey, and hopefully can expedite the learning curve for others who are doing this for the first time.
Thank you. And that is a great segue. So I want to kick things off because you all, when March 2019 hit, or 2020 hit, and we all had to go home, leave our beautiful offices and start adjusting to a Zoom life, you all were currently doing this. So what changes have happened in the last 6 months for you all, going from a already remote life to now everyone's remote?
Well, I'll jump in because, we are, I think it's very interesting what the co-panelists are saying. We are a hybrid, and we are grappling with some of that right now, Emma. And, it touches the hiring piece, it touches the onboarding piece. We've always hired people remotely in every functional unit of our organization. But now we're at the intersection of that question of, okay, what are we doing, not just because of the pandemic and it's forcing our hands, but also because of our sector and because we want to compete for talent. And so for us, we'll talk about some of this, but for us, what's changed is, unlike the other organizations that we're talking to here on the panel, we've had to react very quickly. And so we've had to try to be as agile as we can, even though, again, we've been hiring remotely as well. But I'd love to hear from the co-panels in terms of how their already remote experiences have changed.
So, I'll go ahead. So for us, I would say we went from being fully remote, and we've always been fully remote, hired fully remote, to working from home, right? I think being remote, there's such a beauty in the flexibility. You can go work from a coffee shop, or you go to your grandparents' house and work for a week. And that was all kind of stripped away from everybody, including those who are already remote, right? And so there's this sense from already remote companies that know it works really, really, really well when you do it right, to kind of want to throw at least for us, to want to throw our arms around everybody and go, this isn't true remote. Like, I promise you, this isn't true remote. This is working from home, right? Because there is an actual operating system and a culture that drives remote work. It's just about understanding what those kind of key pieces are. And I'm sure we'll get into that in the next few questions of kind of hiring remotely and onboarding remotely, sole remote.
Yeah, I cannot reiterate enough, Darcy, what Darcy just said, which is this is not remote as we've all known it. Even in full transparency, like 2 minutes ago, one of my sons, who's 15, who's a sophomore in high school, came in because I was like, stay out of my office, who normally wouldn't be here. And he's printing. He's like, I'm so sorry, running behind me into the home office. So this isn't the norm. And so for us, we did have to do a couple of things. So first of all, it was a lot of support. This is like, hyper remote work, additional support that you would need in a remote workforce with the recruiting and with the onboarding and hiring and everything. It's about making sure that they have additional support, because there's no daycare for a lot of employees. There's no school. We're like, I'm a guidance counselor, a teacher, a math tutor, which is really unfortunate for my sons. But so balancing that, and most of our employees, we looked at it, 43% of our employees are impacted in that way. So that's a big chunk of our population. The other thing that we had to pivot on was we do at certain levels, even though we are remote, our culture is very relational, and we do get together in person quite a bit. So we have quarterly in-person meetings where we fly people in, we do an annual summit, we have leadership summits, and we've had to pivot on that. So a little less impact on the hiring and more on our operations. In regards to directly with our hiring, anyone who's a director or above, we do bring to HQ, which is our headquarters in Boulder, and we do an in-person interview. So we've had to pivot. We've had a few roles that were a more senior or executive level, and that's been a bit of a challenge, having to figure out how do you assess a candidate and really look at the skills, competencies, how they're going to elevate your team when you're doing that remotely. And we've had to pivot by doing a little bit more interviewing than we normally would, because it is remote, and really relying on cross-functional interviews as well and using Zoom. We're so overusing Zoom, but it's kind of the only option we've found that seems to be working, where we can get groups in for more senior levels, and then taking a little extra time to talk afterwards. Like, we have to do more downloads and just be a little more coordinated when we're bringing in those more senior candidates.
Got it. And that's a perfect transition because, of course, we are all here to talk about hiring. I myself, I am hiring for Choozle right now, and we have never been remote. So I'm sure a lot of people on this call are trying to figure out, how do we run interview processes when Zoom is our only option? We can't bring people into the office. We can't meet them for coffee. So I would love to dive in a little bit about that. How have you all been doing the hiring process prior, and have you had to make changes now that everyone is remote? What does that look like for your companies and yourself?
Totally.
Yeah. Sorry, no, please go on.
I'm happy to, yeah, just kind of jump in here quickly. So for us, obviously, nothing really has changed throughout the hiring process for us. Obviously, we're always trying to fine tune it and be more intentional. We've seen quite a bit more applicants, obviously, these days than we were seeing in the past, as well as kind of our business model. E-commerce is taking off, so that as well. But for us, something that we really hold tight to at Taxjar, and we've done this for the last almost 3 years, is we actually have a mutual assessment after our 4-step interview process. So we have a 4-step interview process with our recruiters, our hiring managers, usually a Zoom meeting with either multiple people from a team, and then also a culture or values alignment interview, because when you're hiring remotely, values are really the pillars that keep your culture together. And that's a really important thing to note when you're hiring. You can't skip on values. You don't have an office that really holds people together in a container that kind of believe the same thing, or in a city that sort of has the same mood. So values are really, really key there. But to touch on what we do after that, we actually have about a 30 to 90 day mutual assessment period at Taxjar. So we are about 95 of 98% sure on a candidate, and the candidate needs to be that with us as well. And we actually bring candidates on before a full-time hire for 30 to 90 days. And through COVID, we've actually obviously made sure we're really working with candidates. We know people are at home with kiddos. We know things are crazy, right? That over permission of, we know that you're human, and making sure that they're communicating that with us as well, because communication is key when we're remote, being able to express our needs and set our own boundaries. And so that has been a game changer for us, making sure that mutual assessment period, that the candidate is assessing us just as much as we're assessing the candidate, right? It's sort of a protection per se, because having to let somebody go later on, even remotely, is just as painful as doing it in person, and it's just as expensive. And so being able remotely to really kind of have a project-based assessment period has just been such an incredible, I think, experience for us, a learning experience for us as a company, as well as for candidates really assessing, is remote and is Taxjar the place for them?
Interesting. I couldn't agree more with you. The cultural piece, the values piece is very important to us at DAT Solutions as well. And, what's interesting about the video format, Emma, as you were talking about, it's in some ways, I think when everybody started down this path, even companies that were remote, it's, well, okay, we're now relying on this in a different way and for different reasons. Some people are at home more than being in a coffee shop and whatnot. But we've tried to turn that into a positive and really look at the benefits that the video format provides. Quite honestly, as someone who's been in talent for 20 years, I think it's fascinating. And I think that it's almost easier to make a personal connection over video, because while in-person has its own texture, there's something about video that kind of tunes out all the noise and really creates a very focused bubble where you can transact ideas. And so more than that, I also think there's more of an opportunity, ironically, to talk about more personal things. Oh, that's a poster from a concert I went to at Jazz Fest, or, oh, that's my son coming in the room, or that's my dog in the background, sorry. And we've all been on those calls. Whereas a lot of times in person, you can end up talking about the weather and things that are a little bit more impersonal. And so I find that conversation about values and culture has a little bit easier of a time coming through on video. I don't know what everybody else feels, but that's kind of our experience.
I would +1 those. Although I wonder how much distraction is going on outside these walls that we don't even realize about. But I would say, just on a more tactical level, because +1 to both what Darcy and Drew have said, but for us, we've had to rely on making a few changes on synchronous versus asynchronous recruiting. So that's one of the things that we're in a different situation where we actually had to do a layoff early on where sports technology, youth sports came to a grinding halt. So we went through that. And as we've had some incremental recruiting, since we realized, especially with reduced capacity on our people team, that we've had to pivot and use a little more asynchronous approach. I was very reluctant to use video interviewing for our phone screen because we used to do a phone screen. I liked that. I liked that personal touch. But one other factor that we had to consider is unemployment is so high right now that we're getting so many more applicants that it's just harder to separate who's qualified from anyone who's just throwing out applications. And so if your ATS isn't great at screening those out, it does put more weight on the people team or managers. So we've relied on the video a little bit more. I tested it. It was a pilot we ran with a few managers. And for our initial screen, that just has some like really general cultural as well as tactical weed out questions. We've also been leaning a little bit more into those technical assessments as well in an asynchronous way where we can get a quick glimpse, nothing more than 30, 40 minutes of what's going on. I think a year and a half ago, we were less likely to do that because candidates just weren't, it was a candidate's market and it's not anymore. So, leaning into asynchronous approach has really been positive for us. And we've also been able to find technology that is a little clinical. Do have a video platform where there's an introduction video from someone who basically, I'm one of our team members who's like, just be yourself. It's okay. You're coming into, we're going to be on video a lot, you know, pressure. This doesn't need to be perfect. And then there's a little closing video. So that helps as well. And then we've just also found having to lean in on coordination. It takes additional coordination doing this remotely, really leaning in on kick meetings and ensuring we know who's asking what questions, what are the competencies you're assessing for, who's on point. That goes a lot further because you can't pop your head over, you know, you're be like, hey, how did it go with the candidate? And then last, making sure our team members, again, with the coordination, timely feedback, really driving everyone to our ATS, everything funneling through there is super important too. You don't have a strong ATS and you're hiring remotely and everybody puts every note, we use Lever and like all of the emails sync through there. So anyone on the team can log in and see every communication with the candidate wasn't theirs. That is game changing to still be remotely efficient or moderately efficient in a remote world.
Thank you very much. That's great insight. So one of the big challenges I have in many companies is the fact that we're not meeting these people in person. We're not able to put on events. All of these recruiting opportunities, touch points that we can have with candidates aren't happening. What is your advice when you're trying to get, you know, build that virtual presence for companies that maybe didn't have it until, you know, March happened? What have you guys done in the past, or what have you had to do to get more in front of the candidates that you're trying to attract?
Yeah, it's so I'll jump in on this because we're at the really crest of our wave in terms of activity in that capacity, Emma. So because we're building so dramatically in Denver, you know, for us, it really, you know, this goes back to the format again. You know, you lose in-person things, but there are things to be gained. We are doubling down on any virtual event we can possibly have, particularly in ones that come from affiliating with organizations where we can find candidates, extend our talent brand, extend our brand in general, and again, particularly in Denver. And so, you know, I'm sure that the co-panelists here have been as part of the virtual job fairs and maybe folks in the audience as well. And, you know, it's funny, you can jump from one company to another at the click of a button. And so, you know, what we've all lost in these kind of in these real happy hours or real events or real on-site company cultural events, we're gaining in terms of volume and frequency. Costs are lower. You don't have to host drinks and food, transportation, logistics. It's really just setting it up. And so, and in addition, your company hosts are always available at the click of a mouse too. So, you know, what we're doing is we're using that as an opportunity to really, really increase the frequency and volume of our virtual affiliations and our virtual events. And again, I find it's really helping us. It's not just some sort of static environment. It's something that's we're getting a lot of traction and it's helping us.
Yeah, I would pivot, our approach has been a little bit different, but it's all about online presence. So we've really had to make sure we're visible with our employer branding, using creative initiatives, getting out there, setting up profiles at different places, going to virtual, there's even virtual job fairs you can join if there's targeted industries or areas that you're trying to recruit for. So we've just leaned in on online presence with employer branding. Last year, we did an initiative, because remember, we were doing this pre-COVID, where we were telling employee stories, what it's like working here. And we were sharing them on our social media and getting that out in front of our customers. And sometimes we've even, put those narratives in with our customers, because you have a great, for us, at least in our industry, that's a great network to tap into, is our customers for recruiting. So I think it's just about getting online and having to have an online presence that differentiates yourself from others. And we have a pretty quirky workplace and culture, so we have the opportunity to have a lot of fun with it.
I'll second kind of a lot of things Sheila and Drew said. Employer branding is key in this market, and obviously online. We've started leveraging actually LinkedIn's life page to really showcase our culture, which has been something that's been really, really helpful. And honestly, your employees are your biggest voice, right? And so making sure that all of our teammates feel incredibly set up for success when sharing blogs that we've written for the company or stories. I mean, Sheila really touched on this. Storytelling is so important, and really making sure that we're telling a story and not only connecting with people who want to work at Taxjar, but also people who might be future customers, right? We want to be speaking to everybody. People connect with people, and humans connect with humans. And that's something that we really want to make sure that comes through in a virtual environment, not only in our internal culture, but when people are choosing to join the company, as well as our job page has quite a few resources. So we do try to do a lot of stuff up front. So people can go to our Taxjar jobs page and understand every step of the interview process. They can see our remote life videos, which are it's a docu-series of 9 different employees, of their stories of what remote life means to them and how they work based on our value system and the product that we serve. And the customers that we serve, as well as just basically always having a blog. And throughout COVID as well, we changed the tone a little bit of the blog. What could we do what can we do in our blog to maybe help those out there? I mean, we literally have a blog post called X for Permission. It's okay to not be okay, diaper blowouts and dinner time, right? And showcasing that our CEO's 6-year-old sometimes hosts our company calls to make it okay for kids to be running around in the backgrounds, because a lot of people who might come from perhaps corporate environments or environments in the past when that wasn't okay, to make that okay. We're in a strange time and we're human. So make our employer branding as human as possible and really connecting with the people and being open and trying to answer a lot of those questions up front with our voice.
To piggyback off of that, Darcy, it kind of taps into, I saw a question, I think it was from Terry there, about how do you balance diversity initiatives and equal opportunity? We've really normalized and work hard towards normalizing having the family at home. That whole idea, again, we're working at home, not working remotely now. So like people's kids coming in, they sit on their laps and we call it out like, oh, look how cute they are. And everyone, we've worked really hard to normalize that. So that isn't even a bias in our hiring, because it's just such a part of who we are, and people's families coming in and crashing are just seen, as they are. I think my kids ran in with a brand new blender yesterday in the middle of a meeting, and we're showing everyone. So those things happen, and the baby on the hip and somebody's kid crying, like we've just made that such a part of our culture that it helps to mitigate the bias. But candidates can they can struggle with that because it's such a paradigm shift. So we just normalize it from the get-go.
I think that's right. And it's nice because it lowers the barriers to entry and creates those personal connections. But it's interesting. I hadn't thought about it that way, that you'd think that it would make candidates a little bit more comfortable, but you're right. It can be a little bit off-putting because for them, it is a paradigm shift. It's a change. Interesting.
Yeah, I want to kind of add a little more to the context of that, because I'm sure there are people watching that are trying to get jobs. And it's hard to stand out right now. Again, you can't show up at an office, you can't be an event, have these networking opportunities. What do candidates do to stand out, especially when we're reviewing and, don't have this touch point? Like, what do you guys look for? What can really help somebody stand out when they know they're just going to be on Zoom and not have that in-touch opportunity?
For us, something that's huge is, go ahead, Sheila.
You're good. I was just laughing. I was like, do your homework. We always look. If and they've done their homework, especially they know our values and talk about them and how they live them. Like, do your homework and show up talking about company and what you know, because that shows you're the number one thing. I think that's a huge, whether it's your cover letter or anything, give the response for sure.
I second that. Do your homework. Even on our jobs page, you know, a lot of these tools, if you've never worked remotely before, aren't really comfortable with perhaps with Zoom or a project management software or Slack or whatever it may be. Most cloud-based tools have free trials, and there's really little excuses out there to not be familiar with these tools at this point if you are serious about getting a remote role. And so that's something I definitely like. You know, we tell people up front is if you're not comfortable with these yet, go practice them, right? Like, go practice them. The world is our oyster with the internet and with the knowledge that we have to access right now. And so that is massive. I would also say, just a second, Sheila, values. I mean, obviously people need to be incredibly competent for the role. And we do obviously look for that within all the applications, but values alignment. It's not about culture fit. It's about values alignment, because if people in an organization share the same values, you'll really be unstoppable. So I'd really say that people who are trying to get roles, when you're looking, look for those employer brand pages and look for the values of the company and ask yourself deeply, do I align with these, right? Do I see myself being successful in a company like this? And I think that deep research and that deep knowledge and self-awareness, because self-awareness is incredibly important in a remote environment, will just set you above and beyond when searching for a role and really identifying, do you see yourself in this company and why?
So I absolutely agree with Sheila and Darcy. And it's so interesting to me. I think one thing, Emma, that I want to touch on, in addition to what Darcy was just touching on as well, is for candidates, I think a couple tips. You know, the format has changed. We are still evaluating people, and people are evaluating us, but the format has a little bit of a wrinkle in it, in the sense that it can be more forgiving, because I think it can pave that way for that values discussion. And by the way, Darcy, I love the way you're articulating the difference between culture and values, because the underpinning of culture is the values, are the values that a person brings to the table. And I think it's a really interesting way of articulating it. But aside from that, I think there's some pragmatic things, Emma, to address that part of your question that candidates can think about. So little things like, what room are you choosing to have the Zoom call in your house, or the Google Meet call, or whatever it is? You know, yes, some personal effects in the background are nice and can pave that way, but you know, maybe you want to think about, are there a couple holes in your wall, or is the angle of your camera off? Quite honestly, you know, sitting up straight and seeming interested, it's not about, well, people should sit up straight. It's about that, you know, are you casual? Are you, tell me more about Taxjar. Tell me more, you know, about DAT solutions. You know, I want to know what's happening. Make that connection. Don't be afraid to make that connection. And then I think the last thing I'd think about is, even though there's not a delay in video like there is on cell phones, it's easy to talk over someone else's comment. And so one thing I would advise candidates on is wait for the interviewer to pause, and then you can speak over it, because sometimes you can get caught in the middle. So more logistically, I think those are things that might help candidates, that they might, in a format of video, they might not otherwise think about.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, so let's jump ahead. We've now hired a successful candidate. We are very excited about this person coming on board, but there's a catch. You won't be meeting them, maybe ever, depending on how long this pandemic goes out. So what are your tips with onboarding? Because I know a lot of people set up lunches, or they have a buddy, or they're thrown into meetings and they get to meet people a lot quicker. How have you adjusted onboarding? How do we make these candidates feel engaged in our current Zoom video world?
Go for it.
Yeah, whoever wants to start.
This was something, actually, I started at TeamSnap about 2 years ago, and we didn't have a formal onboarding process. And I flew out to headquarters for my first day. And all of a sudden I was like, oh my gosh, if I wasn't here, what's happening? And so we started building very quickly. So a few things that I can, that have helped us. And some of you are probably like, these are very basic. Doesn't matter, but they're necessary now. I think any chance you can onboard, we had just rolling starting dates whenever, which was very hard for a small department. So we started limiting them. And the reason was to cluster starts. get people buddied up, and I see Darcy like shaking her head emphatically, it makes a difference. We started with Trello, and we have a checklist, and we have a full onboarding 2-day to the company experience. So we translated what you would have if you worked in a workplace, which is you go in, you fill out your paperwork, you have your class on your culture and the values, and then you meet with someone. We just made it remote. We moved it. So we've moved to Lessonly, which I actually like. So it's a very fluid program, and we're working towards building. If we're hiring an engineering manager, we can like bolt the manager training into, onboarding into and an engineering training into our normal or standard orientation. So we're working on building that, but that has been key. So we do the full thing. We also ask everyone who participates to record videos. So if they're on vacation or out of town, we have the same structured. Here's our strategy, here's the culture, here's the values, here's your resources. We give candidates time to meet with their manager, and we ask them to connect with 5 cross-functional peers. And that's really important. So we ask the manager to handpick 5 cross-functional peers outside the department to help with the onboarding. We've also actually started in a remote world onboarding on Wednesdays very intentionally, because there's 2 days with just this traditional corporate onboarding and orientation, and then we move to 1 day with the manager. It's a lot more emotional energy and mental energy orienting remotely. And so we find doing it in 3 days is a much better orientation experience for the candidate and the manager. So those are some changes we've made, but having an online system where we can track and see where the candidate is or if they get stuck. We also have an orientation Sherpa. So we have somebody totally dedicated on Slack that first day. One of our generalists, she is the one who she's available no matter what. She knows those orientation days during that time zone, checks in the morning and before they sign off at night. And then throughout the day is 100%, like 20, I guess it'd be eight hours of peer coverage to make sure that if they get stuck, that person isn't going to feel alone.
It's interesting. That's what we're doing. We're moving towards a dedicated. I love the name Sherpa. I love the concept. We're moving to a dedicated model like that as well, because it's interesting. In the past, if you're on site, even though co-panelist companies aren't, you have a different outage experience. If something's down, you can still conduct business. Now, when you're remote, you have to have immediate resources. And so we found. We've been, trying to survey and put survey tools in place post onboarding to find out how are we doing. And what we're finding is there's more responsiveness on our IT and support channels because you just can't be out. And one thing we're doing too, and I'd be curious to know what Shelia and Darcy are doing, is we are looking at programs to onboard even earlier. So sending T-shirts and mugs to folks ahead of time, maybe even for their final interview, to acculturate them to the experience of onboarding remotely and what that feels like. And our understanding and our experience is that's going to create more of a personal connection up front so that day one is a little bit smoother.
Totally. So for us, we're fairly fortunate because we have the mutual assessment period. So if you're coming on or decide to come on, we decide to bring you on from the mutual assessment period. It's almost like this soft transition into full-time onboarding. So similar to how we kind of mitigate what Drew was talking about is we'll get the address. Where are we going to send your computer? Where are we going to send the swag box? And so on day one of when they log into Basecamp, which is what we use, I always call it like Slack, if Slack and Asana had a baby. But like we have, it's a to-do list, and each day we actually have 5 full days dedicated to onboarding. And we as well as Shelia, we do have an onboarding specialist. She's one of our people experience designers who is there to answer any questions. And a lot of it is done async, but another thing we do is Shelia mentioned was we batch hiring because we started hiring so many people. We hired 100 people in 2019. So we batch hiring. So our CEO still meets with every single batch. We have one of our product managers who meets with every single batch to kind of talk about the product. And there's usually about 2 synchronous meetings that week, as well as our onboarding specialist who kind of helps walk the individual, if they were to run into any problems or anything. But it really sets each day, we really dedicate it. So first day, it's just just like you were to walk in an office and get your badge, right? Email me all your I-9 documents, and here's where you need to send them, and here's where we're going to store them, and here's all the documents you need. And day 2 is all about finances, and day 3 is all about your perks. And so you can kind of help the individual get into the mindset and the flow of really understanding the operating system of the organization. And the last 2 days, we really have intentionally tapered it off. So if there are any questions, they usually meet with me on the last 2 days, as well as we really encourage people to celebrate. I think that's something that we forget when people get a new role, right? Like, this is a time to take to celebrate. You're going to be here a long time, hopefully. Like, sit with it and kind of be proud of yourself. Like, that's really exciting, and we're really excited that you're here. And so that's really intentional. It's about a 3-day, really deep, intensive, full-time onboarding where it trickles off into any questions, anything with benefits. You don't, you just have 24 hours to decide what healthcare is going to take care of your family. Like, that takes a lot of research, and it takes a lot of going back and forth with our generalists and understanding what we offer. And so giving that ample time, especially remotely, is huge.
Well, thank you guys. 2 more questions, and I'm going to open it up to all of our attendees, what questions they may have. So I am curious, looking back at the last 6 months of all of our new normal, what do you wish you knew now that you didn't know? What do you wish you knew now from the last 6 months of hiring and onboarding and all the people things?
Get a comfortable chair, Emma.
I get that request a lot. Yeah, I've heard that.
Which would be I think for us, it's you can only live life in one direction. What's going to happen was obviously a big question. I think the cognitive shift from it being less about tragedy and more about adaptation. And obviously, I'm not talking about the tremendous losses in people's personal lives, really just the business world. And there are losses there too. But for the sake of this panel, thinking about it, changing our thinking away from, oh God, what's going to happen in this kind of gloom and doom, to adapting. And, not only just adapting, but turning these adaptations into positives. And what can we do to make this better? And I think that I wish we'd all known that 6 months ago, because we might have been able to enter into this with a little bit more grace and gravitas and calm, as opposed to kind of the frantic scrambling that I'm sure we've all done.
Growth mindset. I mean, we knew it before, but I think it's clear more than ever. There's 2 types of mindsets in this world, and I believe fixed and growth. And when hiring, when managing people, just making sure that as managers and as leaders, that we are tapping in and leaning into our growth mindsets of change and adaptation. I think that's the biggest thing that we can do right now and for the future, for all of our futures. And especially that's really something that taught, I know, Taxjar and myself, is just leaning into that growth mindset, always learning and growing, and in the pursuit of just trying to be a better person, a better company, and a better steward to the world.
Yeah, I cannot agree more. In fact, to the point where we had, right before COVID, we had made the decision to integrate, and this speaks to someone in the comments, said, can we talk about managing remotely? We had added adaptability and growth mindset to our 9 box as one of our 4 criteria. And I am so grateful for that, because as I just had talent meetings with every one of our managers. The people who are thriving in this time are those who do have that. So that's shifted in our screening as well as management and training, and really pushing that competency and that skill in our one-on-ones, and encouraging managers to really talk about that, help people flex. The original question that I kind of derailed from was, what do you wish you had known? And I wish I had had the foresight to see that, the one thing that really was a big differentiator in how we operate and could recruit for our talent brand is going to be the way of the norm. And so I wish I had had a few more months to get off my heels and do better employer branding about other parts as well of what we offer. So that's the one thing I look at, is I wish I had known, but
Yeah, it's interesting because all of us have gotten a very good business and life lesson in these last 6 months. So my final question I'm going to ask the panelists will be this next one. But if you are joining us and you have any questions for them, please start putting it in the chat, and then I'll address those after this final question. So my final question that I love asking anybody, what is keeping you up at night right now in your role? Because we have definitely learned we are not experts at anything anymore. But what's the current business problem, talent problem that you're trying to solve that you'd like to share with us?
total rewards, like no question. I'm curious to see what high unemployment rates and working remotely, what's happening in the Bay Area as people are adjusting. Like, is that going to change compensation quickly? And to my point, the employer branding is everyone starts offering more flexible remote work. What does that do to total rewards and how you build a strong employer brand? You know, the culture is the foundation of it, but you've got to have some pillars of total rewards. And I'm very curious to see how that may shift. There are roles right now that, you know, there's tons of people on the market, and the roles that are really hard to recruit and retain because there's a high demand. So that keeps me up at night for sure.
I'd say for me, burnout keeps me up at night. The time that we're in, people generally just were used to being able to go on vacation, or perhaps just being able to kind of turn off. I live in a 350 square foot apartment, and my fridge next to me is my whiteboard. And so my office is just in my house. And I have a pretty, like, I used to travel quite a bit. And that has been something that I'm really concerned with all teams and all people who have kind of been locked into, if they've worked remote before, but are now kind of in this work from home, as well as people who are being thrown into working remotely. Burnout is high in remote environments and in startups. And it's simply because we're taught, especially in US society, that we're worth our work and our output. And when that is in our house and integrated in our life, we have to be really, really, really self-aware. And also as companies and as leadership teams, really, really over permitting and making sure we're working with our teammates and setting the example to come away, take time for self-care, and take time to come back. I heard an amazing quote the other day, and it was, I'm not going to remember it, but it was something about a sharp saw cuts through wood much faster than a dull one, right? And that's so important these days. So burnout keeps me up at night for sure. And the future of kind of really ingrained in technology and not being able to kind of pull away from that, especially during this pandemic time.
I love that, and I completely agree with that. I'm glad you're talking about that, and I think it does have, you know, it has cultural ramifications. What's keeping me up at night, though, is a little bit more aligned just for where DAT is with what Shelia is struggling with, which is, you know, we're growing very dramatically. DAT is really, really pushing, and our numbers, not just in aggregate, but on a percentage basis compared to the total number of people currently in our company, are pretty large, particularly in Denver. And so for us, it's, can we compete? The total rewards. You know, what are we going, you know, how much of a remote swing are we going to take at the ball in terms of, you know, moving folks remotely, onboarding, staying competitive from a cultural perspective, like Darcy's talking about, and values. And because at some point, at the end of the day, you know, we've got to scale, and we've got to scale in a market where it's competitive, where now, and Shelia, you're absolutely right. Now the norm is going, you're not, being all remote is not a differentiator. It's other things that sweeten the pot. And so that's what keeps me up at night, because we've got to operationally hit our numbers. So.
Got it. All right, I know we've got a lot of questions here. And again, this topic has so many layers to it. But real quick, what are the software systems you all are using to manage virtual employees right now? Or any suggestions you have for our audience on what tools have been really helpful during this time?
I'll jump in because I think that, you know, when we were all chatting before the call started, we use the G Suite of applications, and we're not using Lessonly. We use Trello, but we're using the G Suite, and I couldn't sing its praises more. Some people struggle with Zoom. This is not a plug for Google at all, but what I'm finding is that, you know, now we are able to leverage the fluidity of a platform like G Suite. It's got Google Meet in there. It automatically adds that link. The quality, the connection time, all very reliable. And when you have an online online application sharing like Google Drive and through Gmail, and it's all synchronized and all connected in real time, it's incredibly powerful, incredibly productive, and is an incredible time saver. And I can't even imagine doing it another way. So if anybody's at that point where they're thinking about making a change, I would absolutely endorse the G Suite of applications for sure.
We use Basecamp. I mentioned before, it's basically a project management software, which also allows for chat rooms and to-do lists. We also use Zoom. We use TunnelBear VPN for security, as well as a host of other things for security. And we do use Gmail, the G Suite, but very, very, very little. We really try to defer to keeping like the walls of our office per se within Basecamp. And then obviously our teams live in other applications for dependent on the kind of nature of the team. But I would say our like home per se is Basecamp, which has really been really helpful.
Yeah, we do tons of videos. So we strongly encourage, and it's basically a general practice that managers meet one-on-one with employees, and that's over video. There's something to be said about nonverbal. So we use Zoom for that. We are as well on G Suite, but we find that the integration with Zoom works really well for us. And it's got a little more flexibility. So different organizations based on the other integrations, we lean a little more towards Zoom. But Slack is really important for just that communication and the side chatter. And we also get folks into groups there that, you know, affinity groups, we have employee resource groups, we have random channels just to get people like, did you see this and what's going on here, or show a picture of your desk. So Slack's really critical for that. And it keeps the emails at bay as well for us. And then with internal training, Lessonly is something we've been migrating to. We use it with our customers. So now we've been using it internally, and that allows you to build both video, you can integrate video as well as written training instructions. One thing I will say that we have learned with Zoom or other things, I think we've used Loom a few times too, to that asynchronous synchronous thing. What I've learned in this day and age, especially working at home versus working remotely, is we do a much better job when we have trainings or universal messaging that needs to be sent, is recording it and sending it out and letting people watch it at their own time at 4:30 in the morning when they're like with a crying baby, or at 7 at night, because that's what works best for them. And then doing maybe a 15-minute, roundtable with Q&A afterwards. That has been a big shift for us, using asynchronous video. That's been really helpful.
Good tips. Okay, this question comes from Elise. Hi, Elise. She would like to know, what stipends have you put in place, especially with being remote? We've taken away snacks for many of us. All the perks of the office are no longer there. What do you guys do for your employees to, give them those extra perks? And Shelia, you touched on the total rewards. Like, what have you seen? What would you recommend, et cetera?
So I'm happy to speak to this. For us, we actually use for what we do a $1,000 professional development stipend, which basically allows people to really invest in their own development while working with their coach, as well as a $250 ergonomic setup when they get hired, to making sure they're setting their office up for success. But we actually have a really, really cool program called an appreciation program. And we actually use Zestful, which is one of the sponsors of Denver Startup Week and based in Colorado. We have a peer-to-peer appreciation program. So every single month, we give every single employee $25 within their Zestful account. And they can go through and they can shoot $5 over to so-and-so or $10 over to so-and-so with, hey, thanks so much for helping me on that project. And what that does, it really gives the power to our teammates to be able to give one another a really exciting thing. And they can't use that money. I mean, Zestful's pretty capped. I don't think you use your grocery store as a gas station. So it's almost like this treat. And we've had people who have saved up their Zestful to buy a new pair of sneakers, or saved up their Zestful to one woman bought her wedding shoes that she wouldn't have been able to buy otherwise. And it has just been this soulful kind of experience that we integrated about a year and a half ago. And that has been a really cool way to not only kind of engage the culture and engage people on different teams with one another, but also really show that appreciation and that perk.
Got it. Yeah, Zestful is a local Denver company, so big shout out to them. All right, final question, because I know we're getting close to our 11 o'clock hour, but I know we didn't quite touch on the managing aspect, but as team leaders, as working with your hiring managers, what has been your encouragement with them? How have you been setting them up for this remote life, and dealing with all these topics we brought today with hard, having to read candidates, burnout, et cetera? How are you coaching your managers during this time?
Yeah, I'll take that one. We are teaching them a little bit better how to interview in a video format. Just the same way we would look to candidates, to evaluate them in terms of how they're presenting themselves, just interpersonally. With interviewers, we find that, because we're in such a time of human empathy right now, everybody's going through so many things. That's wonderful, and that's critical. but it can also change the trajectory of the conversation to a little bit more chit chat as opposed to actually asking the hard questions that you need to ask to find out if this candidate's going to actually have the hard skills to do the job. We talk about very basic things like making eye contact. We talk about finding out, is the candidate making eye contact with you? Same thing with the team connection. And then also proactively make a personal connection. That's going to pave the way for a conversation that will be productive. And then finally, you as hiring managers and interviewers, you're the holders of our talent brand and our brand. And so the way you project that is going to speak to our culture and our values and who we are as people, and will, again, ultimately yield to a better candidate experience and better hire, in my opinion.
Yeah, we focus on personal contact as well. The one thing I found from our people team is we've had to really lean in on the coaching and asking very specific questions about how their people are doing to ensure. So it's not, have you checked in with your employees? Talk to me about last time you checked in with so-and-so. Like, what feedback have you given them? And then it's very clear if it was like, well, a few months ago we talked, well, it sounds like we need to have another conversation. So really leaning in on coaching our managers, that they're the glue, right? The middle managers are the glue to keep people connected to the organization. So that's how managing remotely, I think that's even more true. So really nurturing, coaching, developing those middle managers. Right before this, fortunately, we had put together like an immersive leadership experience, which was really helpful. And then we do twice a year, we have full-blown talent check-ins where we go through a 9-box, talk to me about how they've grown, where are they developing? So making sure we're very specifically checking in. And then the last thing we've done is kind of PX skip or people experience our skip levels, where we actually rotate in between our CEO and the people team. Once a quarter, we meet with every employee for about 30 minutes. How's it going? Are you getting feedback? And we manage that way, as well as we use Poly on Slack, and we pulse our employees and we ask questions once a month just to have an open feedback loop. So that seems to help us keep driving towards people management in a time like this and developing and growing people in a crazy time.
Yeah, Darcy, anything to add?
I would say we actually, similar to Shelia, we developed an internal leadership academy. So another kind of beauty of being remote, we have quite a few teammates we call our managers coaches. And so we kind of did a West Coast group, a Mid Coast group, and an East Coast group. And we are doing it all internally. So we have, I believe, 8 different modules that we're putting all of our coaches through. So one is really dedicated to one-on-ones and having effective one-on-ones. One is about vulnerability and empathy. One is about unconscious bias, right? And what are all these things that we really want to arm our coaches up for success, right? We really want them to be able to manage just as well remotely as they would be in an office. And we find that it's actually sometimes even easier and better. And somebody also asked in the chat, which I think is really important, is what do we do to track productivity or like manage productivity? And this actually kind of comes into play with our philosophy as a team. And I think it's important to note in this call is we're a team built on trust. And if you have somebody right now on your team who you don't trust and you feel like you need to manage or track their productivity, they probably shouldn't be working at your company. And I say that, it might sound harsh, but I say that with heart and love and just with the importance of trust in a remote company, of really, really hiring people who you trust and you want to set up for success. And so we really instill that and hire coaches and instill that in our coaches, and that power in our coaches, really making sure you give your teammates the right instructions, right? The right check-ins. It's okay if a project gets delayed, but we need to know why the project's getting delayed. Is it because you don't have enough resources? Is there something going on? So keeping that clear, open communication with direct coach to teammate and coach to coach, and being able to have an open forum to talk about those things is incredibly essential to managing effectively remotely.
Yeah, we don't manage for productivity, we manage for results. And that's a really important differentiation. I mean, we don't track people's time except for our employees that have to track their time, but even their managers, that's their payroll. That's a pay issue. That's not a productivity and a quality of work issue. So it's, what is the quality of work? Is it timely? But that trust is the absolute foundation. And I think that there are, in a remote culture, managing up or managing out becomes more important, because if you can't trust that work to be done, it will be the death of that team very quickly.
Got it. Well, guys, we are at the hour. I want to thank all of you, Darcy, Drew, and Shelia, so much for joining us. I think this has just been such the power of being virtual, is that we can have so many people from all over the country joining us, just as we do in this panel. Thank you again. We do have all the contacts for our panelists in the chat. If you guys scroll up, if you do want to reach out, I'm sure they'll be happy to say hello and answer any questions that we didn't get to touch on in this last hour. But thank you again for joining us. Enjoy the rest of Denver Startup Week, the rest of day 4 and day 5 tomorrow, and we will all see you soon. Goodbye.